You may not know it from the style of content that comes out on this channel, but I'm actually far more of a movie buff than I am a game connoisseur. The simple truth is that for the most part, when it comes to critical review, I believe movies should be looked at from an objective standpoint for the most part. That's why I more or less stopped posting movie content because, frankly, it's kind of boring to sit there and say most movies that make it to theaters are what they are, and that's in the poor to just alright category. There's movies I've been very passionate about in the past few years that I would recommend you go and see, like Oppenheimer, Past Lives, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and some smaller projects like Fire of Love. But for the most part, I find it rather draining to sit and talk about how not great most movies are. For the most part, I watch movies with a critical eye, and that doesn't leave a lot of positive to talk about. This is why I prefer to make content about games. There's objective realities in games as well, but there's far more room for interpretation as no two people will ever have the same experience in game. With that being said, however, I'm a little down today, and I do want to talk about movies, specifically ones I think you should watch. Now, this doesn't mean this is a list of the 5 best movies I've ever seen, although my pick for the best movie ever is on here. There's plenty of people out there who will tell you that you have to see The Godfather, Casablanca, The Dark Knight, Pulp Fiction, and Chinatown, but this isn't what that list is about. These are 5 movies I think everyone from the aspiring cinephile to the casual movie fan should see for one reason or another. I aim to keep this video spoiler free, but if that becomes impossible at any point, you'll be warned. Let's kick it off with a Christmas classic in Die Hard. Yes, it's a Christmas movie, and I'll die on that hill. If you want to fight about it, speak up. I'm happy to go a couple rounds in the comments. Regardless of your opinion on that particular subject, what most people won't argue over is the fact that Die Hard is one of the best action movies ever made. Shot in the era of the heavyweight hero like Schwarzenegger and Stallone to contend with, Die Hard brought us something different in the blue-collar badass John McClane. When a hard-nosed cop finds himself thousands of miles from home trying to reconnect with his wife at her company's Christmas party that's then taken over at gunpoint, there's only one thing to do, and that's fight back. John McClane was a different kind of tough, finding himself outmanned, outgunned, and under-equipped. He doesn't start a guerrilla warfare campaign, he tries to get help. We spend the first third of the conflict with John desperately trying to avoid the bad guys while trying more than once to get the local law enforcement involved. When he finally does get a police response, he sits back thinking his job is done, it's time to stay out of the way. But it isn't, and when he realizes it's going to fall to him to fight back, that's what he does. Our hero doesn't grab a knife and start plucking guys off one at a time. He takes notes, gathers information, scavenges what he can from the enemy, and fights desperately to survive while doing whatever he can to keep as many people alive as possible. With a vibe that at the time was in such opposition to what it meant to be an action hero, Bruce Willis put his stamp on film history. Bruce isn't the only standout, however, as Alan Rickman puts in an all-time performance as our villain Hans Gruber. He manages to weave a character who's truly not nearly as smart, charming, or intimidating as he thinks he is, while still keeping both an incompetent FBI and a desperate detective on the back foot. Bonnie Bedelia is intelligent, level-headed, and witty, showing her qualities as a leader while quietly playing whatever cards she can to improve the situation. Die Hard is my definition of what an action movie should be. Action-packed, tense, balancing quiet moments and humor while maintaining a serious tone that allows for the best aspects of the characters to shine. If you haven't seen it or haven't seen it lately, this is your sign to sit down and go enjoy a trek through Nakatomi Plaza.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
While we're on the topic of everyday heroes, what about one of the only stories I've ever seen that was written by normal people? Manchester by the Sea hit me in such an unexpected way. I've seen movies with writing that brought me joy, writing that baffled me, and writing that pandered to me in my favorite ways, but this felt like it could have been written for me. This isn't a happy story by any means, but what baffled me is just how often the words coming out of the characters' mouths would go to match the ones coming out of mine at the same time. For the record, I watched this at home, I wasn't just talking in a movie theater. Watching Casey Affleck, who gets way more flack than I think he deserves, put in a performance that felt so entirely human and so real honestly changed how I see movies. Entertainment is escapism at its core, and I understand that. It's why I watch it too, but sometimes it turns out that escapism can come in the form of someone else's brutal reality. To see an average and relatable person deal with tragedy in a way I find familiar was a comfort I would have never expected. To see genuine trauma presented on the screen, at first without context and later having it, to feel the weight of the world on Lee's shoulders is incredible. Characters who lost something act like they lost something, they act like a piece of them is missing. You can see that they broke in each in their own ways. Some overcoming the loss and some staying trapped in it, unable to overcome the trauma of their tragedy, and for good reasons as well. Teenagers act like teenagers, parents act like parents, brothers act like brothers. And without spoiling the ending, it felt like it could have been based off a true story. I'm dancing around the facts because I really don't want to spoil this movie as I feel it would take away from your first viewing. It's a story that's told out of order and fitting the pieces together as you watch, bouncing from scene to scene and year to year is all part of the journey. I want to warn you that it's a heavy story, and it is, but I didn't feel morose when the credits rolled. There's something about the movie's honesty that just makes it so incredibly approachable. It's almost like the fade to black hits and you just go, yep, that's life for you. This is the exact kind of movie that this list is about, and I hope you can find the time to watch it.
Look at there's the North Star right there. Right there.
Where?
Due north.
Next up, we have a case study on how to do conflict in a story in Crimson Tide. Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington portray a nuclear submarine's first and second in command. When orders come in to launch the missiles, but the potential that it isn't actually the correct thing to do is floated, we have a stalemate. The movie creates a scenario where both characters are equally right and equally wrong, missing a critical piece of information in the form of a half-delivered message to determine whether or not they should be launching or not. We spend the movie in an ideological battle. With the stakes being nuclear war, Denzel's character, Lieutenant Hunter, will stand on principles against the salty veteran and Captain Ramsey, and when he believes that it's his duty to stand against his commanding officer, he does just so, forcibly relieving him from duty, which leads to civil war inside the ship as the other sailors take sides. Each side will gain and lose ground as the tension and desperation of each side raises, causing them to take more and more drastic action. There's an enemy sub in the water hunting them, and with communications knocked out, there's no way to know if above the surface there's a nuclear war going on that they should be involved in. There's nothing wrong with stories where there's a clear good guy and a clear bad guy, but that's not the story we have here. Two potential protagonists separated only by who you agree with in the moment make for a phenomenal story. Interestingly enough, the screenplay was written by Quentin Tarantino, and while the difference in direction shows, his commitment to the craft shows bright and clear throughout the story. Not to mention a score by Hans Zimmer, all the elements are here to create an all-time classic. This is one hell of a film that seems to have slipped under the radar for a great many people, but in a year that contained all-time greats like Seven, Heat, GoldenEye, Braveheart, The Usual Suspects, Casino, Apollo 13, Jesus, 95 was a hell of a year at the box office. I can understand why you may or may not have had the chance to watch Crimson Tide yet, but I implore you to correct this gap in your cinematic history as soon as you can. Also, if you've seen the movie, who did you think was right before the end? And did you keep the same opinion after?
You have to set an example even in the face of stupidity. Now, everybody that reads comic books knows that Kirby's Silver Surfer is the only true Silver Surfer. Now, am I right or wrong?
It's hard not to have a smile on your face when you're watching Denzel work, but not every night is one you want to spend watching something in high spirits, and if you want something hard-hitting, I present to you with the perks of being a wallflower. I'll warn you that this is a heavy movie with very heavy subject matter, one that I often watch when I'm going through a tough time and need an emotional reset. That being said, it's a wonderful coming-of-age story as we watch Charlie find his way in a world when he tries to find himself in high school. This movie is for the people who just didn't quite fit in with the average high school expectations, seeming to excel in no one place, but only because they haven't found their niche yet. When Charlie finds a friend in Patrick, which will lead him to Sam, it's like he discovers that he was so much more than he ever could have dreamed. The Perks of Being a Wallflower is a movie about coming to terms with the fact that those things that set you apart don't make you lesser, they make you more. We're carried along a journey of self-discovery as each of our main characters comes to terms with who they are. Charlie isn't always perfect and will make mistakes as it's clear that relationships like these are new to him and he doesn't always know how to navigate them. There are moments in this movie that I genuinely struggle to watch, but that's all part of the experience. This movie has a little bit of everything. Hard-hitting quotes,
we accept the love we think we deserve.
Action, romance, tragedy, excellent performances, a great soundtrack, and an ending that'll inspire you. I think there's a lot of wallflowers out there who will be very glad they found this gem.
You can't just sit there and put everybody's lives ahead of yours and think that counts as love. I don't want to be somebody's crush.
Our last pick is something very different to the rest of the list. I chose the other movies because I think all of them have a part that you can get something from. And I think the small part is important. This, however, is 12 Angry Men, and it's my personal pick for the best movie ever made, along with being my absolute favorite of all time. The story is simple. A boy stands accused of murdering his father, and our story will follow the 12 men in the jury room who will decide his fate. The truth is that he doesn't stand much of a chance as kids from low-income backgrounds tend to fare in the legal system. Given a poor defense attorney and with racial bias stacked against him, it doesn't look good. This is reinforced in the preliminary vote when 11 of the men in the room vote the boy guilty before even having so much as a discussion about it, willing to send him to the electric chair without so much as a second thought. Alone stands juror number 8, who doesn't claim to think that the boy isn't guilty, but in his own words,
Well, there were 11 votes for guilty. It's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
He stands on principle, believing in the system, not content to just walk with the crowd. Right off the bat, that's the best part for me. There's a lot of genuinely good people in this room who just lack the view to see what juror number 8 did, to understand there was more to this case than they had realized on the surface. The man stands alone, but he stands tall, asking simply that they talk it out and they can see if they can convince him to see it their way. The same way there are good but misguided people in the room, there are people who vote guilty for all the wrong reasons. From thinly veiled racism, personal baggage, and pure laziness. One piece of evidence at a time, they break down the case, swaying back and forth as to where they stand on the term reasonable doubt. Even as you start to see the potential for a not guilty verdict, seeing the potential for innocence, a hard question will be asked, shifting us back to a more neutral mindset.
Supposing you talk us all out of this and, kid really did knife his father, huh?
The movie may essentially take place in one room over one simple day, but don't let that fool you. There's conflict to be had, and there's never a dull moment, whether on the first or a repeat viewing. You may look at it and assume I'm just a pretentious cinephile claiming the best movies were made before color, but this movie works for every generation when seen. From angsty teenagers to smooth-brained gamers and old heads, 12 Angry Men is one hell of a movie that any can and will enjoy.
I'd like to ask you something. You don't believe the boy's story. How come you believe the woman's? She's one of them, too, isn't she?
You're a pretty smart fella, aren't you?
So that's it. I needed something on the lighter side after how much Cyberpunk took out of me, and I just wanted to talk about something I feel very passionate about. If you guys enjoy a list like this, I have plenty more movies I would like to talk about and wouldn't mind adding it to my regular content when I have time in between other videos, so let me know. That being said though, that's going to wrap it up for now. Like and subscribe and all that, blah blah blah. You can follow me in the links in the description. All the love you showed me on the Cyberpunk video warmed my heart, and I'd like to thank you for it. It convinced me to keep making content. That's going to be it for this one, guys. This is Purple signing off. Have a wonderful night, and always remember to smile. Thanks, guys.
I can see it. There's one moment when you know you're not a sad story. You are alive. And you stand up and see the lights on the buildings and everything that makes you wonder. And you're listening to that song on that drive with the people you love most in this world. And in this moment, I swear, we are infinite.